All right, good afternoon. My name is Michael. I work for the Institute of International Education. If you are watching this either live or on demand, happy to have you. This is the Boren Award. We are going to talk about a scholarship for both undergraduate and graduate students who are interested not only in study abroad and learning a language, but also interested in working for the federal government when you graduate. Thank you very much to our campus reps, Meredith and Brian, who's invited me here. Meredith is going to be your undergraduate campus rep. She is Meredith, and apologies, Meredith. How do you pronounce your last name?
Because it's Monahan.
Monahan, perfect. And Brian is Brian Canny, and if I said that wrong, I apologize, because I have a last name nobody gets right.
It's fine. It's Kenny.
Kenny. So I'm Saffle, even and everybody pronounces it Saffle because that's how it's spelled. Anyway, happy to be here. I'm going to go through the Boren eligibility. I'm going to go talk about the program in some detail. And I encourage anyone here who's live to ask questions along the way. You do not have to wait. You can throw them in the chat box, and I will read them out loud. I'm not sure if people who watch this on demand can see the chat window. So I'll just read the questions and answer them. Or you can unmute yourself and jump in and ask. So let's get started. This program is a part of the Department of Defense. We, generally speaking, most scholarships for international study, you'll see through the Department of State. Think of the Gilman Award, the Critical Language Scholarship, Fulbright, things like that. This program is a little different. We're run through the DoD, but we have similar eligibility requirements. You have to be a U.S. citizen to apply to this. You can't just be a permanent resident. You must be a U.S. citizen. If you are an international student, there are other things out there. IIEpassport.org, for example, is a place you can research that. But for this particular program, we need to get you in the federal government. We need to get you into places of certain jobs are going to have top secret and even above levels of clearance. So we really need to make sure you're a citizen. You need to be interested in applying to part of the world where Boren goes. We don't go everywhere, unlike the Gilman, where you can pretty much study anywhere. The Boren Award is specific to regions of the world U.S. students don't travel to. I put that in quotes because most U.S. students don't travel at all. Only 12% of college-age students study abroad in this country. It is a very low number. Part of the reason why State Department and the Department of Defense put on programs like this is to get that number higher, to get more Americans those overseas experiences, and in our case, the critical language experiences. You have to maintain your student status. So those of you who are undergrads, if you're a freshman, a sophomore, or a junior, this is fine. If you are a senior and you're expecting to graduate in spring of 2023, that is going to give you some challenges, perhaps. And I will let your campus reps jump in if that's not a big challenge. And but basically, the challenge is you can't graduate and then do the Boren Award. If you are a graduate student about to graduate, this is not a postgraduate program. This is not a gap year program. One of the things that's written into the Boren legislation is that you are a student in good standing while overseas on the Boren Award. So you must maintain your student status. We do not have requirements that you're taking credit while you're overseas, but your school might have that requirement. Basically, we usually defer to the school and their rules when it comes to what does and does not count as matriculation. So it looks like I see in the comments, our register is very accommodating and grants Boren recipients special status. That is fantastic. And a lot of schools do that. Not every school does that. So I'm very happy to hear that. Finally, you have to, if you are a dual citizen, like my children are both Colombian and American citizens. They have a Colombian passport and they have a US passport. They are not eligible to study in Colombia, but they're still eligible to study in other parts of the world. So those are the requirements. You will see this QR code in the top right. If you don't see it, you got to move the chat bubbles around. That QR code will take you directly to our website, whichever topic I happen to be talking about in the presentation. If you're interested in learning more, hit it with your cell phone on your camera setting, just like you were at a restaurant. It should work fine. Now, This is a national security program. We need you, when you're applying to whatever country it is you want to go to come up with a reason to explain to the committee, the selection committee, why this program, why this country is important to US national security. And the good news is there is a wide variety of ways you can do that. We have a very broad definition of what national security means. We do not put a definition anywhere on our website. We want you to tell us how the country fits into national security in your definition. So, for example, if you are a national, maybe you are a international relations major, which is a lot of our applicants are, you will go a more traditional path, military perhaps, where a country sits and its relationship with its neighbors. Maybe you are in a STEM field and you can talk about how the country's specific engineering feats are interesting and should be studied by Americans, and would understanding better how, for example, Japanese buildings are created to withstand earthquakes could help the US, not only in our earthquake-prone West Coast, but also now with fracking, although that's a controversy, earthquakes that are happening now all over the place. That's just one example. Environmental science, human migration, human trafficking. There are a lot of ways you can talk about national security. We want you to focus on one. We want you to be detailed, but also specific to one argument about national security. Make sure you don't forget the US part. It needs to represent US national security. And ideally, it connects to the rest of your application. Within that application, you're also going to talk about working for the federal government. This program has a 12-month service agreement attached to the award, which means if you get funding from us and you take that funding, you use it to study abroad in, let's say, Korea, and then you come back, you graduate, you have 3 years, if you won the scholarship, you have 3 years to start working for the federal government. That 3 years gives you plenty of time to look for work. We will help you in that process, and I'll talk about that. But when you apply for the Boren, you really need to convince the committee that federal work isn't something you're just willing to do for the 12 months and then bounce, that it is something you have an interest in, that you have a long-term interest in it, right? So that's the kind of thing we're looking for. So we are preferring applicants who show this long-term interest in federal work. And just so you know, even though you have 3 years, let's say you graduate, you're an undergrad, and you decide you want to go to graduate school immediately, or maybe 1 year into your search, we will postpone that 3-year window, depending when you start your graduate program, and then start it again, start it back up once you finish your master's or your PhD or your, law degree, whatever it is, business degree. So that is something that is called an educational deferment, and that is something that we're quite happy to do. The government will wait for you to finish your education, and then you can start working for the government. Whoops. Let's see if I can get this presentation to go forward. Sometimes my computer acts like there it goes. See, now too much. All right, language and culture. So this is a language award. We are looking for folks who are interested in studying a foreign language. The good news about the Boren is most of our languages, in fact, all but 2, you do not have to have any background in the language to be eligible. So if you've never studied Arabic, Mandarin, Russian, Japanese, Portuguese, Korean, our top languages, that's fine. This program was created to get people to start studying this language. If you've already taken a semester or 2, or maybe more, that's great as well. But everybody needs to have an idea of where they're going to go with that language. What are you doing right now to study? Let's say it's Swahili. Do you have Swahili available in Brandeis? Maybe, maybe not. I'm not sure. If not, you could be doing things. You're in you could do things on your phone. You could try to start picking up some vocabulary on Duolingo or Rosetta Stone. You would explain to the committee what you plan to do to learn Swahili, whether you're doing a program like we have on our athlete, which I'll talk about in a minute, or maybe you found a program in Kenya through your school that you want to do, but you'll talk about what you're going to do there to learn the language. And when you get back to Massachusetts, what are you going to do to continue your Swahili? Are there opportunities at your school to take intermediate or advanced classes of the language? And if not, what are you going to do to maintain your contacts in Kenya or in Tanzania or make new contacts in Massachusetts that would allow you to continue your study? These are the things that we look for in a competitive essay. Good to know what your expectations are. Also good to know that they're realistic. So if you've never studied Mandarin Chinese before, and you're heading over to Taiwan for 12 months, we don't expect you to come back fluent. Chinese is not an easy language to learn. I don't think any language is really easy to learn. But the idea is you can't say, you know, I'm going in an absolute beginner and I'm hoping to be fluent by the time I get out of Boren. I don't know if that sounds realistic. Realistically, I'm going to hope to come back with intermediate, perhaps. Or I'm going in with intermediate Mandarin. I'm hoping to come back with advanced Mandarin. So everybody should have some proficiency expectations, some goals, but that don't sound, you know, out of touch. Maybe you will become fluent in 12 months. Who am I to judge? But the idea is the committee will look at that side, you know, that sideways look and say, really, do you think you're going to learn that much Arabic in 6 months? So be aware. Finally, what you're studying, the language that you're studying, let's say you do a 12-month program in Qasid in Jordan to study Arabic. And you are now racking your brain, what do you want to do in the federal government that has a direct link to Arabic? You don't have to do that. You could work for the FBI or a bunch of other agencies where you would be a linguist or a translator, but that's not required on the program. What we're trying to see is that year overseas or that 6 months overseas and those language skills, how does that make you a better applicant for whatever the job is you are interested in federal government? If it's a foreign service officer through state or USAID or commerce or agriculture, if it is something like working at Department of Homeland Security, if it's something to do with DOD, whatever it is, you want to show that link between this experience on Boren is going to help me get my foot in the door in federal work. We do fund 2 types of programs. Our own programs, we call these the flagship language initiatives, and we have self-identified programs. Self-identified programs is pretty much everything else that Boren does. Everything else that Boren doesn't run. And I'll talk about each in a second here. So the FLEs, that I call them, they are available to undergrads and graduate students, and they're available at all levels except for French. We have a FLE in French. It's one of the 2 languages I have a requirement for. They are fully funded. We cover the program costs, the living expenses, airfare, all that jazz. They're intense. These programs are roughly 60 hours a week of language, which is more than double some of the most ambitious fellowship applications. I would say 60 hours a week is a lot. You're basically doing more than a year, almost 2 years of language in a 6-month period. And when you're doing a self-identified program, it's much less than that we see as an average. So just understand that this is a language-focused, intense program. And we combine a domestic and overseas component to this. So if you apply to our programs, you'll end up in a US university for the summer and then overseas for the fall. Our African program is called AFLE. It's been around since 2010. French and Swahili are our 2 most popular languages on this program. The other languages we get very few applications for, but they're available if you're interested. But French and Swahili, I'll focus on. French, you have to have intermediate high going in. You don't have to have that right now, but you need it by the time I test you. If you apply for French, I'm going to set up an OPI, which is an on-the-phone test of your French. And we need to make sure that you're at an appropriate level, or else the class would be too much for you. So as long as you have about 2 years of French under your belt, maybe all 4 years of high school would count as well. You'd probably want to take a refresher before we test you in next winter. You would probably be eligible for the program. French and Swahili, you don't have to have any background. Any of the other languages, you can be a complete beginner. Most people are. But these programs are at University of Florida, no matter which language, for 8 weeks. That is in Gainesville, Florida. And then we ship you off to different parts of Africa, depending on your country. The Senegal and Tanzania program, on the first 2, we have overseas partnerships with a company called American Councils. And they are the ones that help run the show. We also work with West African Research Center in Senegal for the French program. I'm not sure if American Councils is involved in that, but that's the exact location where you would be. These programs will provide a homestay. You will be provided everything that you need. You go on a lot of excursions every other week. Again, these are very intense programs. They are mandatory. If you apply for an athlete, you have to do the summer program in Florida and you have to do the overseas program in the fall. So those programs do allow you to extend if you wanted to stay an extra few months in country. You could do that as well, but that's optional. Most people are only applying for the summer fall program, and it is a lot. You get transcripts from this. They may or may not transfer to what you're doing in Massachusetts, but it may. But the idea is that you will get credit for this. You'll get a certificate. You'll know where you are at the end of the program, what your OPI score is, what your level is, and you can use that when you look for work in the federal government or outside of the federal government. Now, we have a lot of these fleas. We have 4 of them. The second one is IFLI, our Indonesian Flagship Language Initiative. I just talked to a person from Liberty College who was currently in Indonesia. He zoomed in. This program is at Wisconsin instead of University of Florida. It is also 8 weeks in the summer. You're in Wisconsin, and then you head overseas to Malang, Indonesia for the fall. This program is for Indonesian or Bahasa Indonesia. That language is, there are many languages in Indonesia, but this is the one that Boren will fund for this particular program. We also have a program in India. It's called Saffle. So most people mispronounce my last name. That program is 8 weeks long as well in Wisconsin, and then you head over to India. You can do Hindi or Urdu. I would say Hindi is by far our most popular language on this program. Both IFLI and SAFLI have the lowest number of applications of most of our programs, of our fleas, which means if you were very open to going anywhere in the world, SAFLI and IFLI would be where I pointed you, assuming you are the type of person who can handle a 60-hour-a-week program, because it is quite intense. Finally, we have one program in Azerbaijan for Turkish. It's in Baku, Azerbaijan. Also Wisconsin for 8 weeks, and then you head overseas. All of the fleas, other than French, again, you can start at any level of the language. So if you are an absolute beginner in Turkish, this is an opportunity for you. Now, these programs are great in the sense that we have fewer applicants than our general pool. So it's a little, your success rate is a little higher on this, sometimes a lot higher. But you sacrifice flexibility. These are very rigid programs. You have to do the summer program, you have to do the fall program, so you don't have a lot of maneuverability. If that doesn't bother you and one of those languages are something you would be interested in studying, I would pursue this. But any of those languages or the rest of the Boren languages, you could also do a self-identified program. So if you were not interested in doing AFLI, but you were interested in studying Swahili, you could do your own program in Tanzania or Kenya. You would go to your study abroad office and you would find out information. Or if you were going for one of the more popular languages I mentioned, let's say Japanese, you go to your study abroad office and you say, hey, I'm interested in studying in Japan. I'm applying for a Boren, so I need to make sure it has a language component, a strong language component. And then you tell us in the application, what is the program you found and how much it costs and what the kind of funding you're going to need. That is the majority of the funding we give out, self-identified programs. The fleas are great, but they're only 30% of what we give out. The majority of our funding goes to these self-identified programs. So if you want to study Mandarin in Taiwan, this is what you're doing. You're finding the program and letting us know what it is. If you are a graduate student, you have options. Most graduate students, although you are eligible for the fleas, most of you don't apply to those. If you are interested in a self-identified program, make sure language is there, because we get a lot of graduate students who apply for research and then they tack on language. And for the committee, sometimes those kind of applications, if you're not focusing on the language enough, they say, well, this person seems like they're more of a Fulbright applicant, not really a Boren applicant. So you have to beware. This is a language-focused program. We're more interested in the researcher than the research. So the research is okay. We get a lot of Boren who apply for the fellowship who want to do research or some sort of internship. But it should be something that's germane to your program and germane to hopefully what you want to do in the federal government. At least should be helping you toward those goals. And make sure that language doesn't seem like an afterthought. The funding we will give you is up to $25,000 if you can stay overseas for at least 6 months, 25 weeks, a little shy of 6 months. But the idea here is Boren has preferences. We have about 5 preferences, and one of them is time overseas. The biggest thing you can do to make yourself more competitive in this application is to increase the time you're overseas. So if you can do 6, well, maybe you could do 9 months, apply for 9 months. That's going to make you more competitive. Stretch it out as much as you can. Some of you won't be able to do that. Some of you will have pre-constraints on your time. Maybe you have to come back in the spring to do a sport or to do some sort of whatever, something to do with your scholarship, right? That's fine. Explain why you can only do less than, 12 to 24 weeks. If you're only doing 1 semester, explain why that is. For you STEM folks, if you're an undergrad STEM major, most of the time we understand why you can only do a summer only program. So we have our summer only programs just for STEM. If you can only do 2 months overseas because you have prereqs in the fall and spring, apply for the STEM program. It's still a language program. You're still looking for a language program overseas. It has to be at least 2 months long. But we do have more. We don't take any points away because you're on a shorter program. We understand that STEM have different schedule restrictions around the country. That may not be your particular college. You may be able to study abroad for a year. If you can, great. But we only let the STEM apply for these 8 to 11 week programs. You're capped out at $8,000, just like a 1 semester is capped out at $12,500. Whether you do an 8-week program or a 52-week program, you still have a 12-month service agreement. That doesn't change. That's just something to think about. Graduate students, we will give you about the same amount of money for overseas only study, $25,000. If you want to, as a graduate student applying for the fellowship, you could apply for summer domestic funding. That would be outside. We're not talking about the fleas, but this would be, let's say you wanted to take, let's say Brandeis has a Arabic summer program, we will give you up to $12,000 to pay for that program. You may not need that much. I hope not. If you want to spend all $12,000 on a summer Arabic program, go to Vermont, go to Middlebury. They'll charge you more than that for their summer program. But what you do need to know, although this slide makes it look like I can give you $37,000, the Boren Fellowship caps out at $30,000. So if you need all $12,000 for that domestic that you apply for, you have to go overseas in the fall. And if that fall program is 25 weeks or longer, you can get up to $18,000 if you used all $12,000 for your domestic. 30 is the limit. 30 is the limit only if you are adding a domestic. If you're only doing overseas, 25,000 is the limit. So it gets a little tricky. It gets a little, basically, if you think about it, if you need the 25,000 for your overseas program that starts in the fall, you are limited to about $5,000 for that summer program. If you think about it that way, it's not too bad. Any questions about funding? Any questions about the programs? Jump in while you're typing. The Boren pays for these, and we don't pay for those, right? The round trip flight, if you want to get an idea of what you're going to pay for your ticket to Taiwan, go to United, because we require you to fly on an American carrier, whether it's American Airlines, United, Delta, what have you. They're going to be more expensive than if you go to Priceline or if you go to Kayak, because the Kayak and Pricelines of the internet world will mix your flights with, you may leave Logan on a Air Canada or a British Airways, which would not be Fly America Act compliant for a DoD program. So you need to fly on an American carrier. If you go to United and punch in Taiwan, punch in December 21st through January 3rd of this year, you'll get a good idea of how much it could cost. And then you can put that in your budget. Boren Fellows can start and Boren Scholars can start either in summer 2023, fall 2023, or even as late as March 1st, 2024. If you're doing the fleas, You have to start in the summer, that domestic program, and do the fall semester. But if you're not doing a flea, and if you're a Boren fellow not doing a domestic component, you can start in any of those 3 areas as well. That was a question I should have mentioned for those of you on demand. What we don't pay for. We do not cover vaccinations, passports, personal travel, or entertainment, meaning if you go to, Senegal's version of, Lollapalooza, I don't know if that exists anymore. That was a concert I used to go to. We're not going to pay for that. That's on you. But if you're doing program travel, for example, on the fleas, you are going to go on adventures every other week. That's something the program pays for, and that's something that you can use your Boren money for. Dependents, that's the biggest one. We're not going to give you extra money to bring your dependents. We don't forbid it, although in the fleas, you won't be able to bring them because of you're in a homestay situation. But outside of the fleas, it's pretty much up to you. We do not give you extra money for it, though, so that's something to be aware of. Just a quick snapshot of last year, and I feel like, unfortunately, it's going to be this year. Good news for you, bad news for me, the outreach person who's trying to get more people to apply. Our numbers are low. We usually get about 800 applications for the undergraduate award, and we get about 300 applications for the graduate award, at least for the last 8 years, right? Up until COVID. Last year, we had record low numbers. Instead of 800 applications for the undergraduate award, we only had 540, I think. And it was very low, which, of course, made it better for the applicant. You had a better chance of getting the award. I feel like the numbers aren't, just based on what I'm looking at right now, it could change. But right now, it doesn't look great. I think we're going to be at best 600 applications for the undergraduate award. We give out, whether I get 600 applications or 800 applications or 1,000 applications, we give out about 200 awards. We have a set amount of money that we can give out. And if everybody asks me for 25K, it will be around 200 awards. So that just gives you an idea. This is a very attainable program. For the fellows, it's even better. 300 on a good year, on an average year, the last 6, 7, 8 years. Last 2 years, the average has been closer to 270, 260. So again, we give out about 100 awards for the graduate fellowship. Actually, we gave out 120 this year. I had a bunch of people ask for less money, so we had more money to kind of spread out. Very attainable. This is a very attainable program. That said, you still need to be competitive, because we have most people who apply to this program know what they're doing, and they're listening to people like me. They're listening to their campus representative. They're going through an on-campus deadline and on-campus evaluation. They are basically ready to apply. They're coming in it prepared, and that's what you need to do as well if you want to be competitive on this program. All right, now we're back. This is a fun one, and this is Microsoft Paint. This is about as creative as I can get. I should have taken at least an art class, right? This is the map. Grayed out areas are where we don't go. Western Europe, Australia, Canada, New Zealand. That's out of bounds for Boren. It is the rest of the planet where we do like to send Boren. Africa, Latin America, Eastern Europe, Middle East, Asia. Now, the different colors, we have 3 colors here. We have outside of the grays, we have green, blue, and light purple. We're going to go with this is a map of the regions of the world we go to. The colors represent different things. The green and blue are preferred countries. That means on a list somewhere written up high on DoD mountaintop, they gave me a list in 2005 when I started working for Boren. I said, here are the list of the countries we deem important to U.S. national security that we would prefer Boren to apply for. It is a preference. We already talked about how long they want you to study overseas. The longer, the better. 25 weeks is the preference. This is the second big preference, the country you choose to study in. If you're picking a green or blue country, you are swimming with the current. Unfortunately, the blue countries are dangerous. We weren't able to send people there, at least dangerous or politically complicated. So we were not sending people to countries that were blue in 2021. That's when this map was last updated. A couple of countries, notable countries like Ukraine, are going to be turned blue as soon as I get the okay. I think you can assume we're not going to Ukraine this year. If you apply to a blue country like Russia or Egypt, or let's see, Venezuela, you're going to have an alternative program in your application. You also want to put yourself in the mind of the committee going, why are they even applying for Russia? Why would they even apply for Ukraine, right? In your brain, just make sure, does this sound like something you should apply for? There are some blue countries where maybe it's okay. Turkey, Egypt, other programs in the US are going back there. Critical language scholarship, the State Department program is going to Ankara this coming summer. Boren is kind of looking to see how other programs are doing before we jump in with both feet to go back into a country. We're a little more, we're DOD, we're a little more suspicious, right? Maybe we're just going to see how that goes. If you apply to a country like Egypt or Turkey, or I don't think we're going back to Venezuela, but we need, I don't know that one. But anyway, you're going to have that alternative program. But think, is it worth it? We're never going back to Russia, at least not anytime soon. So the committee may see that first pick as just being rose-tinted glasses or just naivete. You have to be careful. Talk to your campus rep, get their opinion. If they don't have an opinion or they're on the fence, come to me. I can tell you when the last time somebody applied and received an award for a country. I have no problem helping you there. The green countries are preferred countries that other than Ukraine don't have any issues with them, at least not of the last time we applied. China is the big exception here. Now, even though China is green, we actually haven't been able to send people to China, but that isn't more of that is the safety issue there is really COVID. And it's not that we're frightened of the disease, of the virus, it's more that we're frightened of you getting stuck in or outside of China. And that is unpredictable at this point, where we have not been okay with sending people to China to study. We have been asking people if they received an award for Mandarin and to study in China. We've been saying, hey, we're not sending people to China right now, but if you're interested, we can move you to Taiwan or to Singapore or to Malaysia if that is something you are interested in. And most people have. So right now we have 57 Boren in Taiwan right now studying Mandarin. Normally we would have an even split between Taiwan and China. So if you do apply to China, actually, because it's Mandarin, Russian, and Arabic, if you're studying one of those three languages, we're actually asking all applicants to have an alternative country, whether or not it's green or blue. So if you apply to Jordan, which is a green country for Arabic, you have to pick an alternative like Oman or Morocco as your backup. If you apply to Taiwan, which is green, you're still going to have to pick China or Malaysia or Singapore as your backup. And with Russian, again, I wouldn't apply for Russia, but let's say you pick Kazakhstan, which is green, you need to pick Kyrgyzstan or Georgia or Estonia or Latvia as your backup country. The biggest thing about having an alternate or backup country in the application is that we require you to have a language program mentioned in the alternative country as well. So you're going to put in a program, of course, for your main country. Let's say it's Kazakhstan. American Councils, this is the program, and you talk about it in your application. If you pick Kyrgyzstan as your backup, you need to find a program in Kyrgyzstan as well. So it's an extra bit of work, but it is important to have because the committee last year, this was something that students didn't notice, at least we noticed. It looked to us as the selection committee, I was sitting as a moderator, but it looked to us that a lot of people didn't notice that was something that had to be submitted when they applied. Most students hit submit right before the deadline, and then they noticed that it wouldn't let them. And when they looked and said, oh, you didn't put in a language component for your alternative country, we saw a lot of people just wrote a sentence like, I would do something similar, right? It wasn't very detailed, and it made it look sloppy. It made the application look sloppy, and otherwise strong application may have gotten dented there. So I'm telling you that now just to make sure that doesn't happen to you guys. Somebody is asking a question. I am interested in applying for Arabic since most countries are not green. Can our backup country be blue? You don't want your backup country to be blue. And in Arabic, we have 3 green countries that I can think of right off the hand. Oman, Jordan, and Morocco are all fine. You could apply to a blue country as your first choice, like Egypt. I think Egypt is one of those countries. It's on the cusp of going green, but it hasn't gone yet. If you were interested in Egypt, have Jordan, Oman, or Morocco as your backup. But if you were applying to a green country, I wouldn't pick a blue country as your backup. You could pick one of these purple countries. The purple countries are not preferred. For whatever reason, they didn't make the list. But that doesn't mean you can't apply. Like Singapore is a purple country, but we have 2 Boren there right now. So it isn't impossible to get into a purple country. It's just that you're picking a non-preferred country. So you need to make that argument a little stronger in your application. So if you pick Mongolia, which is my favorite example here, it sits in between Russia and China. I have no idea why in the world it's not considered a strategic country or an important country to U.S. national security. It feels like it should. I can make that argument. I said, well, this is why the federal government should be interested in Mongolia. This is why it is important to U.S. national security. And you make your argument like you would any other country. But the countries that are not preferred have a lower success rate. I mean, Mongolia, we haven't had an application for Mongolia since 2015. We haven't had anybody get selected for Mongolia since 2013. So it's not impossible, but it's also, you're swimming against the current here. But again, and I said Singapore, it's a blue-purple country, sorry. And we have 2 people in Singapore today. A lot of that has to do with us not being able to send people to China, but it is possible. So if your country is purple and you're curious how feasible it is to go to that country, again, you can talk to your campus rep or you can talk to me. I'll put my contact information at the end of this. And I can say, hey, yeah, the last time we sent somebody to North Korea was never. So don't apply there. North Korea also not preferred. Now, here are the list of languages that we have preference towards. This is again the third what we call our big preferences: time overseas, the country you choose, and the language you choose. Now, you will see in Latin America, we only have 2 preferred languages, where in Africa, all indigenous languages are preferred, to the extent that we can't even write them all down because it would take up too much space. We wrote some of the ones that are more popular and the ones that are in our FLE program. But only French out of all of these languages needs a intermediate high to qualify for. All of these languages are preferred, even though most in East Asia, most of our applications are Mandarin, Korean, and Japanese. If you apply to, Malay or Thai or Vietnamese, that doesn't mean you have a less of a chance to get the award. Actually, the committee is very interested in reading applications outside of Taiwan/China, outside of Japan and Korea, because almost all of the applications they'll read in their committee are for those 3 countries. So they look forward to seeing the occasional Indonesian or Malaysian application. It's or Cambodian, right? So don't feel like you shouldn't apply to those just because they're not in our top 6. Now, Latin America, and I'll go back to the map here. A lot of green countries, not a lot of languages. But Mexico, all the way down to the tip of Argentina and Chile. These are all, almost all of these countries are preferred. Now, why don't we have Spanish? Well, Spanish is already the most spoken language, not only in the US after English, but also in the federal government. So there's not a cry for, there's not enough places in the US to study Spanish, right? That's not an issue. So Spanish is not considered preferred because it's easily taught here. It's easily learned here. We had about 15 or 18 applications for Spanish last year on the Boren. 2 were selected. To apply for Spanish, you have to have advanced Spanish, and you really have to convince a committee that giving $25,000 to study a language that's already well spoken is worth, the ROI is important. It was 2 graduate students who did it. They weaved a very thin thread to get that in. For the most part, our Spanish speakers on Boren, we say apply to Brazil, apply for Portuguese, swim with the current, don't swim against the current. You're picking a preferred language, a preferred country. The committee will see that you have Spanish under your belt, and they'll know that you'll pick up Portuguese even faster than somebody without it. So you're making it a big positive instead of a negative. Haitian Creole would be great if I could send you to to Haiti. Haiti is a little too unstable right now for me to send people to Haiti. We didn't send anybody to Haiti recently. You could find a Haitian Creole program probably in the Dominican Republic if you look hard enough. But again, that one's a tough one. I would, again, point to Portuguese if you can. But if you are interested in Haitian Creole, you can ask me questions about it. Now, these are all preferred. These are all preferred majors. So whether you are in red or white, these are preferred. Now, the red majors are our STEM ones that are eligible for that 8 to 11 week summer only program, and only those. If you are a psychology or political science major, you have to apply for at least 12 weeks overseas. And to be more competitive, you're going to apply for 25 or more, but very minimum is 12 weeks for you non-STEM folks. The STEM folks, again, 8 to 11 is okay, but you can also study for 52 weeks. If you don't see your major here, let me know. More than likely, you're just going to have to pick the drop-down menu in the Boren application. Doesn't have every major that's known to man. I would say, like, I was an American Studies major after I decided I wasn't going to be a theater major forever. I ended up, if I did this program, if American Studies isn't in the drop-down menu, I knew I was doing American history / anthropology, so I could have picked either of those as my drop-down choice. If you are in education, if you are in English major, you may see that drop-down. It is not a priority, though. It is not a preference. That doesn't mean you can't apply for it. I want you to apply, even if you are not in a preferred major, mostly because I think if you have an interest in study abroad, an interest in language, and you really do want to work for the federal government, you can be a music major and still get this award. You just have to explain to the committee. You may need to be a little more direct. It may seem strange that a theater major would want to work for the federal government, but this is how I came to this idea. This is how I came to this interest, right? You're going to kind of have to spell it out. And perhaps the letters of recommendation you have and your campus evaluation should all be on the same page. How much time do we have? We have 15 minutes. Now, I want to say, when it comes to applying for jobs in the federal government, in fact, when it comes to your job in general, there's going to be two realities that we're dealing with. The reality of your application, keeping in line with the preferences of the application, and then the reality of actually looking for work in the federal government. So in the application, we're going to ask you to apply for jobs. We talk about jobs in our, we're going to not require it, but we're going to, I'm going to say, it's a good idea to look at our priority agencies, and I'll get to those. Because that's what the committee is looking for. Those are where most Boren are hired after they finish school and are looking for work. In the reality of actually looking for work, though, it's completely different. So what you write about in your application may be all about the FBI, for example, right? You're going to write about the FBI, and this is what I want to do. This is my career path I want to take. But when you start looking for work, maybe the FBI isn't hiring. Maybe you put in an application, but you haven't heard anything and you're running out of time. You can apply for any job that NCEP sends you, or go look for jobs on your own. We have hiring authorities that allow you to cut through a lot of red tape. We have a job fair every year in August. It's in September, where we bring you in. This is what this picture is. We bring you into DC for a 2-day program where we go on the ins and outs of applying for federal work, how to make use of your hiring authorities, how to show that in your cover letters. What does a government resume, how does that differ from a normal resume? And its volume, by the way, is the answer. And then we have a job fair. We'll invite 20 to 30 government agencies and sub-agencies to show up and show their wares to everybody, right? All of these things we're doing to help you get your foot in the door in the federal government. None of this is a guarantee, though, that you get a job. We're not going to force anybody or put somebody in a desk somewhere in Langley. This is going to be something that we show to you. The NCEP service team, the group from DOD, they're going to start sending you emails as soon as you get back from your Boren and register with them, basically saying, I am home from Boren and I'm ready to start looking for work. They're going to start sending you emails once or twice a week with opportunities all around the government that would fulfill your service. You don't have to apply to any of those. Again, you can do it on your own, but this is going to be something where you have the responsibility to apply, to interview, and ultimately just say yes or no to a job. That's going to be on you. There's no absolute guarantee that you're going to find work. which means if you go 3 years and you haven't been able to get work and you have exhausted all your options, or you found a job, let's say in the private sector, and you just don't want to give it up, Boren will ask for their funding back. So it happens very rarely. It's under 5% in the last 28 years. But this is something that would, the committee knows is a possibility. So that's why they're very, very tight on saying, okay, let us make sure we are only selecting folks that we are confident they're going to be able to find work in the federal government. ROTC students are encouraged to apply. ROTC students who have participated or not in Project Go, which is a program only for ROTC students. If you are in ROTC, you are a strong candidate, especially if you're commissioned. If we know you're going to work for the military post-graduation, obviously that's going to fulfill your service 4 times over. But that is something that we look for. We even ask you in the application, make sure you hit yes. If you are a vet, make sure you click on that, because vets have a more than double, almost a double, is that double? It's about double % chance of getting the award than an average applicant. So US vets have a near 50% acceptance rate on this program. This is DoD, of course. Now I will tell you, vets, you also have an advantage in the Fulbright. So if you haven't applied for the Fulbright, or you're thinking about applying for the Fulbright next year, this is something to think about as well. There is a preference. Now, as I mentioned in the application, we're looking for you to be interested in the priority agencies, Department of Defense, Homeland Security, state, or the intelligence community, now with Space Force. These are big, giant programs. This QR code on the top right is going to point you in a direction that will give you an opportunity to see a lot of positions, not necessarily positions, but you will see places where Boren have worked in recent past. And we kind of break it down to not just the DHS, for example, Department of Homeland Security, then we break it down to different parts of the DHS. For example, FEMA hires a lot of Boren every year. Now, almost nobody talks about working for FEMA in their application. And again, you're not tied to what you write in your application with what you actually do in your work. So if you wrote all about working as a Foreign Service officer, it is understandable if you end up working somewhere else in the federal government. You still get credit for that. We're not forcing you to be an FSO. It's just something to think about. Maybe you're coming into this application already interested in a job in a different part of the government that doesn't involve these 4. So these 4 are considered tier 1 agencies. We also have tier 2 agencies, which would be pretty much everything else. Agencies that have national security maybe perhaps national security jobs, but they're not under our priority. So ideally, you're not mentioning these jobs unless you have a passion for Peace Corps or CDC, NIH, and it makes sense with your major. You wouldn't be mentioning these, at least this wouldn't be your first choice in your application, but maybe it is. If you've always wanted to work for NASA, I want you to write about NASA. I want you to write about Peace Corps, because you're going to write a more interesting essay. But also show that you're interested in other aspects of the federal government, especially Peace Corps, which is a 2-year job, tough job, but only 2 years. And that doesn't quite count for long-term commitment to federal work. Talk about what you're going to do when you get back from the Peace Corps. And maybe there you can mention working for state or USAID, which lines up well with that Peace Corps experience. That's just one example. There are a lot out there. But yeah, some people are going to have just different ideas of what they want to do in the federal government. But it's good for you to know, should you be selected for the Boren, that there are a lot of options. And also contractors, which I wrote about here on the top. If you are a STEM student and you're thinking, I want to do the Boren, I want to go overseas, but I don't want to give up being a contractor for like Lockheed Martin or Boeing, because a lot of my peers have found work there. You can work as a contractor if they're under a DoD contract. It would still count toward your service. So that is another way you can fulfill your service. It's not what you would write about in your application. You would write about working for the DoD, as a Fed. But if you end up working as a DoD, like I'm a contractor for the DoD right now, working at IIE. What I'm doing today would count toward my Boren service if I had one, because I am getting my money is coming through a DoD contract. That's not something I would write about, but it is something that does work. The application elements, I have about 7 more minutes. The essays, we have 2 essays. You're going to need, if you're an undergrad, 2 letters of recommendation, 3 if you're a graduate student. The language proficiency evaluation is only for you guys that are already studying the language you're applying for. So if you're applying for Japanese and you're currently taking Japanese, I want your Japanese professor to have a language evaluation in your application. It is basically a checkbox of where you are in different aspects of the language. There is a little area to put in a paragraph, but if your teacher doesn't feel comfortable writing in English, which a lot of language teachers don't, that's fine. They don't have to. Letters of recommendation, though, when it comes to a letter of recommendation, it's also okay if the letter writer doesn't speak English as a first language. We get a lot of those as well. If your language professor wants to write a letter of recommendation, they can do that, Victoria. That's fine. If you are taking German or Italian right now, but you want to switch to Arabic, that's perfectly okay. Your German and Italian teacher, they're not going to be able to write a proficiency evaluation because that's not available. They can write a letter of recommendation and just say what a great language learner you are, and that has merit. So these are the things that you can look at. By the way, these cheery guys are Boren awardees from the Clinton School of Public Service in 2022, and their Twitter page let me take those pictures, and I asked permission. They said I could. So essay 1 is going to be that national security argument. Stay in your lane. Pick a specific argument that relates to what you're studying, what you want to do in the federal government. Essay 2 is going to be focused on that national security, on the federal work part. Essay 2 in the application, there are 3 bullet points. We ask you to give equal measure to each one, equal thought to each one. And we say that. That means roughly 33, 33, right? Percent per bullet point. It is amazing how many people talk so much about the first bullet point, where we talk about what's your background, why are you, what makes you qualified, It's this kind of more of a personal aspect to the essay 2. The last 2 bullet points are more about what you want to do in federal government. And so many people spend so little time talking about federal work in essay 2 that it boggles my mind. And it's every year since 2005. And no matter, we've changed the essay around a bit, everybody seems to spend more time talking about things other than working for the federal government in their essay 2. So that's something that I would definitely say, hey, watch out for. Make sure you're spending equal time. 2/3 of your essay should be revolved around those 2 final bullet points. So be careful. We have a webinar on our YouTube page about the essays. It's a year old, so the deadline dates are off by a year, but it's still worth going back and checking out. I have not yet made an update to it where basically I would just change the advice is the same. It's just the dates have changed. I would go there to our YouTube page and check that out. Application deadline. Now, there is no graduate fellowship, Boren Fellowship deadline, on-campus deadline for your school, I asked. January 25th is when you have to hit submit, 5 p.m. Eastern time. That's when you hit submit. Once you hit submit, you cannot go back and edit your application. So make sure you're ready. Now, for you undergrads, there is going to be on January 1st, you're going to have to basically commit that you're doing this. And I can't remember the phrase Meredith used, but it is not the final on-campus deadline. There, early January, you're going to have your pretty much everything ready for Meredith to go over your application and give you an opportunity to fix things. Any of these dates, December 1st, early January, you're not hitting submit. You're just sending an email to Meredith saying, hey, I'm ready for you to look at my application, and we can set up a meeting and go over it. But once you hit submit, you can't go back and edit it. So be careful. If you accidentally hit submit, this is a good opportunity. You have to email me. Meredith or Brian, they can't unsubmit your application like they can in other programs. I wish you could. So I have to do it. And it's not hard. I can do it in about 4 seconds, but you're going to have to email me. It's a whole thing. And if you do this on a Friday night, I may not see it until the following Monday, right? You don't want that to be don't hit submit until you're absolutely ready. And I think we're going to get a bunch of applications from your school, and I hope so. Finally, the national deadline means we submit here. We will tell you whether or not you receive the award around April 15th, tax day. That's when we generally send out the email to all the people that applied, whether you were selected, not selected, or you're an alternate. Everybody gets an email the same day. the earliest your Boren can start is June 3rd, 2023. And we say that specific date. You can start later than that, but the earliest is June 3rd. We have a mandatory orientation in the summer in DC. It's one of the 2 trips to DC we'll pay for. Doesn't come out of your award. Where we go over safety, safety briefing, give you an idea of what you need to remember. So when you do a background investigation later, when you start looking for work in the federal government, we already warned you what you need to remember about your overseas time. So that means you can start this program as early as June 3rd. You can start this program as late as March 1st, 2024. So most students on the Boren start their program summer or fall. Less than 9% of our students start after the fall semester. So we'll have about 9% of our Boren start for the winter. It depends on your schedule. It depends on what you want to do. Before I take questions, and please ask me questions, really quickly, don't mail us anything. I wouldn't expect you to. This is we are in DC, but none of us are here. In fact, we moved house. We no longer live in this 1400 K Street. We have changed office buildings. We're waiting for our new office building to open around February. So boren@iie.org is the best way to get in touch with me. If you have 14 questions you want to ask, call the number 618-NCEP and then dial 1. That gets to me. I'll answer the phone if I can. I'm going to be in New Mexico all next week. Email is still the best. I don't mind if you have a giant email, just bullet points or number the questions, so I make sure I answer them all for you. Happy to do so. If you go to borenawards.com, sorry, not com, that we don't own that, .org, borenawards.org, there you will see the link to our social media. The YouTube page is really the only one worth anything. I run them all, sadly. So you'll see like Facebook hasn't been updated in a long time. YouTube, though, has a couple of recent webinars on there, a bunch of alumni videos. Look for that webinar about writing a creative essay. Again, other than the dates at the end, which will be all 2022, it's the same webinar I would give if I gave it today. So it's a wonderful opportunity to how to write a competitive essay. Brian or Meredith, if any of you want to jump in, or if any of you have questions, this is time to ask. It's like a marathon. It's 101, and I apologize for going over.
Thank you for this, Michael. It's super helpful. I know that our students are appreciative, and the recording will be helpful as well for those who weren't able to come or had to drop off early. Just a reminder, always happy to work with undergrad or grad applicants on their essays, on their applications. The prompts are complicated to address equally. I think that webinar or that YouTube is definitely worth watching. And yeah, just meet with us. Happy to help however we can. And Brian, I'm sorry you're sick. Sounds terrible.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun.
Oops, I put in the link to everyone. Let's see. Did I do this? Here we go. I'm sending this. There's the link to the YouTube. I don't understand social media or YouTube very well, so you will have to search a little bit for it, but that's the direct link. I think it's underneath informational videos, but it also may be underneath alumni webinars. Just you'll find it. You'll find it. I trust you guys.
We'll find it and share it out with people
Excellent.
as well.
I'm going to go ahead. I don't see any questions. If anybody has a question, I'm going to hit stop on the recording. And again, if you're watching this on demand, I couldn't hear you. So send me an email and I'll answer what I can.